I just got back from Ireland. My first time to Ireland. So I've been to Northern Ireland a few times, but I've not actually been down south because I try to avoid Axis countries. I'm joking. But they're putting forward this hate speech bill, which is going to affect all of us. And so I was invited out there to speak on the hate speech bill. We had sessions in the Irish Parliament, and we had sessions in Trinity College Dublin, essentially trying to promote the idea that free speech is fundamental to Western liberal democracy. Why is it important? What's happening in Ireland? Why does it affect us? Well, because Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, they're all based in Ireland because it's a tax haven. And so any law that Ireland passes to clamp down on free speech will affect those platforms, and we use those platforms. And so we're all at risk. So before I tell you about what the bill is, here's a short little clip from the people at ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom.
If passed in its current form, it will inflict a significant blow to freedom of expression in Ireland. We're here in Dublin, and the building behind me is the Irish Parliament, where politicians are debating one of the most far-reaching hate speech laws in Western Europe. This law has the power to criminalise the possession and distribution of certain materials. It has far-reaching criminal sanctions, including up to 5 years in prison, and it is all based on an idea of hatred that's not even defined in the legislation. This is EXA's European headquarters in Dublin, and the hate speech legislation that the Irish government is planning to introduce has the possibility of impacting free speech across Europe, because over half of the large online platforms in the European Union are based here in Dublin. From universities here like Trinity College Dublin to the workplace to the private home, hate speech laws will reach into conversations between people and create great uncertainty as to whether you can discuss controversial topics in Ireland. Hate speech laws create an environment of intolerable intrusion into private conversations, into public advocacy, and into every area of life. They create uncertainty as to whether you can discuss controversial topics. They put criminal penalties on your ability to speak freely, and they must be stopped. Hate speech laws are not about protecting anyone or making society safer. They're about cracking down on unpopular opinions, about criminalizing dissent. And in a democracy, that fundamentally undermines freedom of expression, which makes our democracy weaker. The proposed Irish hate speech law contains provisions for fines and, shockingly, even criminal sentences for the possession, distribution, and expression of so-called hate. If passed in its current form, it will inflict a significant blow to freedom of expression in Ireland. There's still time to amend this legislation, and we certainly hope that the Irish government will do so.
So if this bill passes, essentially everything we do and say on Twitter will be censored through Ireland. And so let's take a look at what the bill incorporates. So the Irish Criminal Justice Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offences Bill, otherwise known as the Hate Speech Bill, essentially criminalizes hatred without saying what hatred means. Of course, the Marxists never define their terms without using the word in the definition. And so it's supposed to protect these protected characteristics, which is a similar situation to what we have over here with the Equalities Act, right? Against racism and xenophobia and all of the isms and phobias that they talk about constantly. However, in Ireland, they already have the Incitement to Hatred Act of 1989. And so if we take a look at what's happened with that act, we can take a look at what might potentially happen with or if there's a need for a new act. So the Incitement to Hatred Act of 1989, between the years 2000 and 2020, there were 44 prosecutions, only 5 convictions in 20 years. So that tells me there's no demand for a new law. There's no massive amount of hate that needs to be clamped down upon, no crisis of hatred online.
Usually when governments cannot do something about actual crime, they invent another category of crime, hate crime. That is why they're saying we're going to be tough on hate, because they're not tough on actual crime.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Tough on hate, what does that mean? It means forcing people to not hate, forcing people to think a certain way. Like, you have a right to hate. You have a right to not be nice. So in its current status, this hate speech bill is in the upper house. So they have a Senate in Ireland instead of a House of Lords. But it's in their upper house. and it's been stored since July 2023. So there's a chance for it to be scuppered. I don't think they can retract it at this point, but they could probably amend it into non-existence. But it passed in the lower house, the equivalent of the House of Commons, by 110 out of 160 members voting for it. So there's massive support across the board in their lower house for this censorious bill. And this all comes off the back of the 23rd of November, when I think we talked about it on the podcast at the time. There were the protests in Dublin. People were opposed to mass immigration. Unfortunately, 5 people were stabbed. 3 children were harmed. And so they use this, as politicians do, never let a good crisis go to waste. They use this as an excuse to say there's so much hatred. It's because there are community tensions, that people are unhappy with the situation. 150,000, roughly, immigrants in 1 year alone. And considering the size of Ireland, that's a large
Ireland's
demographic
population is what, 5 million, I believe? There's more Irish people in the diaspora across the rest of the world than there are in Ireland.
Exactly. So a massive change in the people, which of course means there's a massive housing crisis and a job crisis, and it's reflected in all the things that we'd see over here too. But a number of high-profile crimes against Irish people by these new immigrants have happened in the last year or two as well. And that includes a young teacher who was murdered. There are a series of stabbings as well across the country. So this new influx of immigration isn't helping the country. It's harming Irish people. And so, of course, they're upset about it. But the Irish government have shrugged it off and said, well, these protests were far-right extremists, and we're going to push through this new hate speech law to help with...
So this is victim blaming from the government, basically. Well, did you see what these protesters were wearing? They were asking for it.
Right.
I mean, who wouldn't have stabbed them?
Right. Their skirts were too short. And so the bill itself, let's look at the legislation. So first of all, as I mentioned, there's a lack of definition of the term hatred. I think they've said that hatred is something that incites hate. Including this definition. Yeah.
They have a very subjective way of understanding hate, which means that it is to the discretion of the judge to adjudicate whether something is hatred or not. And this is one of the main problems with these hate speech bills, that they are so subjective and so phrased in such a way that they essentially give a blue check to arbitrary government, because it turns the presumption of innocence into the presumption of guilt.
100%. And of course, it's all very abstract, and it's you're right, subjective. So it depends on who it is. So if I'm saying something, if you're criticizing Christianity and I'm criticizing Mohammedanism, we'd both get treated very differently for the same exact thing. That's the problem. There's two-tiered response to it. But they say in this circular definition of hatred that it's to protect protected characteristics. But even protected characteristics are ill-defined. So their definition of gender is gender of a person, or the gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender, or with which the person identifies and includes transgender, and a gender other than those of male and female.
Well, it's the characteristics of the groups that are going to politically support them. Yeah.
So essentially, gender can mean anything, whatever you determine it to mean. So it's not just male and female, or trans, but it can mean any of the 99 or however many genders there are at this moment in time. But if you don't subscribe to that ideology, you're already guilty of hatred from the get-go. So you're breaking the law. And the problem here is that the application of this law is complicated in itself. So it's not just offending someone. It's not just being hateful of someone. It's inciting hatred by behavior of any kind. And so that doesn't mean you have to say something. It could mean you're standing outside a mosque and turn your back to the mosque in protest. It could mean silent prayer. It could mean anything that is an act of behavior. You don't have to verbalize your hatred. And so it's thought crime, essentially.
Last year, they were also saying that hateful behavior is behavior that is likely to cause sentiments of hate.
Right, exactly.
Even more subjective, and just anything can do that.
So it's not just your behavior, it's what your behavior might incite. So you, by not saying anything, could cause someone to hate
Silence is violence.
Well, it's entirely based off of the behavior of the person who might, who is been incited to hatred. So they can hate anything. Hatred is often an irrational emotion. So if you got there by irrational means, well, it turns out that whatever you were doing that led to the irrational emotion rising up, it could have been saying hello to someone, extending your hand to shake theirs. That can inspire hate. Somebody may be in a bad mood that day. Anything could be going on that. So I guess that means you were inciting hate.
She could be a Mohammedan female who doesn't shake hands. So your microaggression towards her would be implying that she has to shake hands. It could be
anything. It's, as you say, entirely down to the discretion of the judge, which means that it's completely subjective, up in the air, used to attack political opponents.
Part of this law says that a person could be reckless as to whether their act or behavior could incite hatred. So even not thinking about whether what you're doing or saying could cause hatred is breaching this law. There's unequal application of it. So a corporate body is treated differently to an individual. So Twitter, Facebook, etc., these large companies can be reckless in a way that you and I can't be. So there's an inconsistency there. But where I find this most concerning, as someone who's involved at the Lotus Eaters, is this possession of hateful material.
Yeah.
And this means any material that's likely to incite violence or hatred against persons on account of their protected characteristics. Essentially, having memes on your phone, not even sharing the memes, but having an intention to share these memes.
What if I own a biology textbook from before 2019?
Then that's
well, apparently
possession of hateful material.
I have interviewed and also spoken to David Thunder, who is an academic from Ireland, who's talking about it. And he says that, for instance, you could be an academic who is questioning the paradigm, and you're just sending your essay, what you're writing, or the manuscript of a book to a friend, or to not a friend, but someone who is going to stab you in the back. And they could say, listen, this is likely to incite hatred.
But it's not. You don't even have to
send it. You're questioning the paradigm. You're going to incite hatred.
You don't even have to send it. Just owning it is the problem. Owning this stuff is classed as possession of hateful material.
Yeah.
Like the right to private property is out the window there. And then this goes on to the search warrants and passwords as well, that you are required to give your password over. And therefore, you're required to incriminate yourself. If you've got memes on your phone, they're bound to suggest that you're intending to share those memes. So you're therefore possessing harmful content with the intent to share harmful content, but you have to give them that harmful content. So you have no freedoms whatsoever with this bill. There is no exception for truthful statements or communications. So even if you're saying what you're saying is absolutely true, if it is seen as hateful, you're still breaking this law.
This happened in Germany now with one politician from the ADF who cited government statistics about the crime coming from people who I think came from Afghanistan. I'm not certain. I think so.
Yeah, they had that immigrant status.
Yeah, and they find her. And the question is, why do you circulate this data and these statistics? My impression is that they want to circulate this in order to push forward an economic interpretation, that crime can only be addressed economically because the causes of crime are only economic, therefore tax more. Tax Germans more for all the groups that engage in proportionately more crime.
That might be it. I think part of it might just come down to the inertia of government bureaucracy with that kind of stuff. Well, we've already had in place measures where we already take all of this information. So everybody in the office who collects that information is just doing their day-to-day jobs without thinking of the consequences. Then it gets circulated, and then afterwards they realize, like the ONS, oh God, we've got to stop collecting this information all of a sudden.
It's harmful information.
Some middle manager's going to come in and go, right, guys, we need a meeting right now. We need to change our processes straight away.
No, I think you're correct.
I mean, me going on the common sense crusade and saying Mohammed married an underage girl, right there, that's a hate crime, even though it's true. But you're right, sharing information, sharing government statistics, if it highlights something that could be seen as hateful, therefore that is also illegal. And so this is where we are. This is what the hate speech bill is. It's essentially removing your right to speech, your right to behavior, your right to privacy, your right to not incriminate yourself. And it's very broad. And the reason we're fighting against it is because if it gets implemented in Ireland, we are all subject to this law, essentially, through the platforms that we use. So Twitter, Facebook, etc. will err on the side of caution and just remove our content, or remove us, deplatform us, because it's not worth having us on there, because they'll get these hefty fines because we are hateful people.
I think really, the Irish government is the wokest government so far. Maybe the Biden administration is more woke, or maybe Trudeau, but I think they're unbelievably woke.
Well, we were speaking before the show that when I arrived there, linking to your segment actually, when I arrived in Dublin, the first thing I saw was the trans pride flag on the door. So you have to cross a threshold, which is the massive trans pride flag.
Oh my God.
You walk outside and
wait,
honestly,
wouldn't that have threat of you accidentally standing on the trans pride flag?
No, it's on the door.
It's on the door.
So there's no way to not.
But what if you bump against it? Is that not a hate crime now?
And you walk outside, and emblazoned on the side of the airport is the biggest flag you'll ever see in your life,
really? The
trans pride flag. And everywhere, and I walked around for a couple of hours in Ireland trying to find Irish flags, and I found 2. All of them, everywhere, were the trans pride flag.
Well, maybe they are likely to incite feelings of hatred or feelings
they do,
of...
so maybe they're in breach of this.
Yes.
On the Irish Parliament, they've permanently emblazoned the trans pride flag. It's a permanent feature on their building.
How have they put it permanently?
They've etched it in.
They've etched.
Like they've been conquered. They're a dominated land. Dublin is no longer Irish. It is now trans pride.
But we have to remember also when we're talking about Ireland that they had the referendums on the 8th of March this year.
Yes.
They had the family and the care referendum. And essentially what the government tried to do is something that is really close to the agenda of the criminal justice bill they are pushing forward when it comes to hate speech, is because what they wanted to do was to arbitrarily define who gets to be a family member who deserves constitutionally supported financing on the basis of redefining the family. So they wanted to say that let us redefine the family to also involve durable relationships. What durable relationships were, they didn't say, purely subjective.
Abstract,
And then the Constitution says any member of a family needs to get financial support. So basically they wanted to give an air of legitimacy to arbitrarily financing political supporters. This is just clientelism in the name of justice.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, the Irish people said no to both of those referenda. Said no, mothers are women, and that's a good thing. And we don't want to remove women from our constitution, especially, I think it was it Mother's Day weekend or something like that? It was a crazy time for them to do it. Try and remove the word mother from the constitution. But the Irish people are very sound, but the government is very woke. There's a massive disconnect there.
Yeah. Great.
But also, I mean, we were talking about it in the office as well. There's something weird about Ireland have fought against the United Kingdom for so long, for that independence for so long, and then they've just submitted to the European Union. Like, where's the independence? Where are the nationalists? Sinn Féin are massive globalists, massively woke, selling out the country. Who are the nationalists in Ireland?
Well, I think there has been a resurgence of nationalism within Ireland, but bills like this and other measures that the Irish government are taking are explicitly designed to try and counteract them before they can get too much momentum going.
One thing, though, that is absolutely weird in this case, and it's very interesting, is to see that there is a very abstract agenda that is being imposed upon Ireland and every Western nation, because they're talking about anti-colonialism, decolonization, all these abstract isms. And Ireland didn't exactly have an empire in the past.
No.
So it's like,
nation.
Just take a country that didn't have an empire and make that country somehow feel guilt for crimes of other empires.
Right. Well, it just shows that decolonization is de-whiting.
Obviously, it's a very big discussion. I'm not playing the anti-empire card. I'm not playing that card. But I'm just saying that even if one accepts it, which I don't, it would be absolutely absurd to impose that on Ireland.
Yeah.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can go to lotus.com for £5 a month and sign up and watch Bo's amazing Epoch series. Bo's, of course, a historian, and he does hours and hours and hours of long-form history content, such as this one on Captain James Cook. These are things he tends to cover subjects that are actually slightly outside of normal, popular histories. So you get to learn about things that are very interesting that you otherwise may well have missed.